Redanzo che Dundani Malaya Japsutrovas, Diego Shirwati Gavuji, Sanjeta, Chanchisimba, Pave, Gasa, and Digi, and the Cotina Lamdin again, Gavuji, and then Japsutragi, Gudilla, Kovi Tungalia, and Chike. Nimbo Meba Tongchen Delia and Kovidunga de la Tarduke Sambaki, Deluki Nubadian, Sulutus and Gemno Conjusum Yores and Big Samloste, Dene Digelian, Nidunga Kovidunga Tadaleda, Gemno Conjusum Guguri, Sembegeta, Denigi, Yiche Bigi, Kilin Dela, and the Gemro said she said, the Corrigan to Tishua, Gemro.
Good evening. So last week, in the 26th verse, we looked at refuge. We saw that the objects of refuge, or those to whom one goes for refuge, are the Buddhas, as well as the true cessations and true paths, and the Arya Bodhisattvas. And we also, not only did we look at the three objects of refuge, but the two causes. First was to come to recognize that samsara itself has no essence, and thereby, through recognizing this, giving rise to a determination to arise from these suffering realms of samsara. And then independent on that, the second cause of refuge is one that thinks, who has the power, the capacity to guide me so as to gain freedom from suffering, or to gain protection from suffering? And that is the three jewels. So that last week we looked at both the three objects of refuge and the two causes.
And in Zadan, Nustin, Jamro, Yamlin Chevale, Kuri, Kovalia, Chik, Kovali Shembalo, and Kovalia, Nimbomeba, and the Kuri Dungalia, and Jike, or the Midibik, Samlachiko, or what Dinaj. Dinez Zadan, somebody sitting the Lamgula case, Delaya, did what been Kovala Nimbomeba, Dine, Kovala de Lanibukini, Kovala Tarkodu, Sempige, Kovala Tarve, Tarva de Topo, the Sempige, Samnodi, the Jima Mayin by Chang of the Kigi, and the Lamgula Kiava, Esigo, watches the Nenzada, and to get Yamlin, you saw the Jake, Chichi to Kapla, and the Korvig, Korvig, the Telia, Nimbomeba, the Tawadi. Dejan, that was a source of delay, and the Tartuke Sambaki, and to Yamnachi, Zorochi, Tam Lam Tarvada, Tamji Kimoko, Tovalada, Dambo Samlo, Zorochi, Tichagorwa.
In order to sincerely go for refuge to the three jewels, one needs to have reflected well on what is meant by samsara, coming to recognize that there is nothing of great meaning in samsara. There is no central meaning or essence in samsara. And moreover, to come to this understanding, one needs to have reflected well on the sufferings of samsara. And these two together, reflecting well on the sufferings of samsara and coming to see thereby that samsara has no essence or no central purpose, this leads to the arisal, the determination to gain freedom or liberation from the suffering realms. When one recognizes that samsara has no essence or no central purpose and wants to gain freedom from it, when this determination is uncontrived, when one's definite emergence is uncontrived, then that consciousness is a path. So to generate such a path, just to repeat, to generate such a path which is uncontrived definite emergence, this comes about in dependence on reflecting well on the sufferings of samsara, coming to recognize that samsara has no essence or no meaningful purpose, and thereby giving rise to a wish for freedom. Yeah, mic's on.
Yeah, the mic is off.
And the mic is on.
The mic is off.
On the Zadang to call a Ningbo Meva said, Ningbo said, Tagajili, Jiki, Donda Chimbo said, the Ningbo said, Yaksho said, Chagurwa Yaks, 당한줄로 코발에 닝보요 말라 요도 근데 닝보 다된 한줄로 닝보 세데 가래를 고고래서나 대화 띠부요 말해서 대화도 변에 직부이다고 하고 띠부시요 말해서 그냥 아주 코발이야 칼라지 심부를 사회에 디기 되었어요. 이네 남사 디기 파조신 균에 동아요하다. 양지가 아주 지도로 사워를 주나 사자 사워시나 제 디기를 되어서 용이나 띠tem부 매발람선 유르체네 유르네 강아 디젤이야 동아래야 용거로 그래서 디자 코발라 닝보요 말해서 쇼코비 취 야구 가는 신나 코발이야 아주 코비 취 디기세다 기부세다 가는 시비네 지금 닝보요 말랍도 템부요 말해서 남산 대화디 규초쇼레스 제산 대화 나라서 가고서는 대화 템부 균에다 대화지 용서베절라 강아 균에면 띵기 대화지 고고래서 제산 닝보세야 돼 띵기 대화디로 고고래 다땡아도 닝보 제산 코발에 닝보요 말해서는 코위 내갑소 취 가는 질량아도 베제당 가르 제베네 가브릴레 디기 되어서 중국어로 이네 디기디 템부 균에요 말해서 남산 유지는 강할 내용을 해서 진짜 조어로 유루를 해서 제산 조에 매봐 그디나 띠네 대화는 대화디 영화요 말을 제사들은 인보요 말했을 때 코비 내가 소취에 가는지 삼다나 띵기 대화 토비야디 영화야디 요 말해서 제사들은 인보요 말했어요. 다른 인보디 가와 요래서나 가리래서나 코비 동아 빵비 코와리 드비게 타르바스 토바나 디디 대화디다 인보들이 해서 닝한소를 고고래서 인보련 고고래서 코비 동아 빵비 빵바 타르바 토여디 탈베 디기디 대화 저러와 어디 인보를 해서 하디 대화네 대화마다 뒤둥어 유래요 말하데 자데 탈비 대화디다 탈바다 탐지케미 고바 토요데 디게 닝보데 토고래서 디네 연사 당하는 저기 콜비 디기 가능시네 최 가능시네 배 코알게 뇌비치 배 짜치무 휴지나 침보래라네 닝보요 말디 디기 띵기 대화도 쭉 말해서
Let's expand a little bit on this expression that samsara has no essence. So this expression, no essence, first just to say as an aside before I continue with what Geshe said, this expression, no essence, it's a different Tibetan word than we hear in the context of emptiness, where we hear, or dependent arising, that phenomena are empty of being established by way of their own essence. So essence in that context is a different word from essence in this context, which is that samsara has no essence. So in English, we use the same word, essence, but they're two different words in Tibetan. But just to unpack then what essence means in the context of saying samsara has no essence. And another way to say this is that there is no great meaning to anything that is to be found within samsara, or no great purpose that can be attached to samsaric phenomena. And how to understand this way of expressing then is that no lasting happiness can be attained from anything that is bound within samsara. So for example, if we eat delicious food, of course we experience some happiness, but that happiness is not what the happiness we long for. This is very temporary happiness. So too with all our new possessions, clothing and so forth. The pleasure, the happiness that we gain through their acquisition, that happiness quickly fades away. So thereby we can see, for example, some samsaric phenomena such as delicious food or clothing or other possessions. They have no essence in that the happiness that can result from their usage, their engagement with, that happiness does not last. We have the hope that our experiences of happiness will last. But happiness that comes from from phenomena bound within samsara, that happiness always fades, and it fades quickly. So therefore we can also understand this expression of essence in this context as having no essence, meaning having no lasting happiness. Happiness may follow, but it's temporary and it quickly fades. Furthermore, we can understand this term in this context of essence as being meaning or purpose. So when we say samsara has no essence, we can say samsara has no real meaning or purpose to it, and therefore our striving in endeavors that remain bound in samsara have no purpose, they have no essence, they have no great meaning. So what then does have essence? What does have great purpose or great meaning? This is striving for and the attainment of the state of liberation. So what has great purpose or great meaning or essence is striving to abandon the afflictions together with their seeds and the resultant state of lasting happiness, the state of liberation. So again, just so that this is clear, whilst happiness can be experienced in samsara, that experience has no essence or purpose or meaning because that happiness will not last. It will not satiate us. It will not satisfy us. And we will be quickly left longing, yearning, and unhappy.
Di ha mogo che deni jimba ja ha mogo che nga ju ko wi ge chue le ba chan pe nga ju ge de ji ge ya na ji dam nyan da ge da chen bo cha de ya pe ya na guo ni chen bo ji ra da de to le be ji be zu xiu je ne da di ra song da xiu ji da de da chen bo xiu ju wen sam go lo da zu wa yi ne pe ne da ju ge da ge gap ji le sam da be ne da guo ni xi xiu de ga su le. The Prime Minister said, "Rogoni Shishu Tiruada, Dila Tenation, that she was some girls, did she pay the shoe, can I tap part to Ravane, and that did she top seven, the Gishu regulars and regular Marta Tetnota, Kangada, same chair, page, Shushi Dirua. And the savage long Island Torture, didn't Yamajone, Gabriel Zungana, or Chagorova, Dine Zadan, that the nation that she was Yahoo, some Tishoji Yahoo, some dance, some that busy, then you work at Makana Yam, the Duma, the Gita Shaminua. She said, Dine Zadan, Dengi, Imba the tin, and Delia Denishi, Levaja Havana, Delia Chakwa, the Chakshin Kigo, just not tell the showman do that, Delia the Yaji go to some better Yahadi Garson, Nyomo Basapana Jeba Pompe, Pong Sompana. Then I mean, do Delia Anchik Gedina Dunga, Devani Devachan do Asibe. That the nigger some night and just Koalia, Dusine, Genta, or Ese, Dusine, Genta, then no Gent Hoyatu, and then Nimbu Mindus and Behawari, Chumin, Nimbu Mindonam, Chimbo to Yaminus and Bay. Then is some other Delia Tarho, the Sembe Tardu, some Bagiri as well.
Stating that everything that's to be found or bound within samsara, samsaric phenomena have no essence or great meaning or purpose ascribed to them. This is something we need to come to understand and reflect on deeply, because the position we find ourselves in now is we do not recognize this. Hence we strive and value the attainment of a good reputation or to have receive praise or recognition. But all of this, being bound within samsara, has no real purpose or meaning or essence. So for example, to attain the pinnacle of power within a country comes about through being elected as a prime minister or president. To achieve such a state takes a tremendous amount of effort, incredible striving. And this does lead to happiness. On election night, there's quite some elation, but that quickly fades, and then problems beset one. And one's the tenure in power is beset with problem upon problem upon problem. The happiness is long faded. And it's also quite possible that one's time in power may be followed by prosecution and potential imprisonment. So this clearly shows how the attainment of something which you believed had real meaning, had real purpose, actually does not. This we need to recognize for ourselves, to reflect on deeply. And to the extent that we recognize that any phenomena bound in samsara have no essence, purpose, or meaning, attachment will not arise for it. We will not give rise to attachment for something which we have certainty in that it has no purpose. We won't be attached to engaging in something that has no meaning or is meaningless. So therefore, we need to reflect well that how samsara, everything in samsara lacks purpose or meaning, so as to prevent the arisal of attachment for something that just cannot fulfill our wishes. And as we reflect effectively there, we'll start to also at the same time come to recognize what does have essence or purpose or meaning, and that is the attainment of liberation. So as one starts to turn away from what's bound in samsara by recognizing that it has no meaning or purpose, we will also come to recognize correspondingly that liberation has purpose and meaning, and thereby, in proportion to the resulting loss of attachment and therefore desire for samsaric ends, our yearning and determination for liberation will correspondingly grow.
Alright, that didn't mind that the wish I said, didn't mind the issue, dinner. That's it. Chonam Guna Shuba Yi, Zosan Jedan, Janshu Sim, Tuji Chimbing, and Namla, and Talmajedu, so on is.
Hopefully that then clears up any perhaps long-standing doubt on the term essence in that context. So let's then return to the text, and now we start with the topic of confession. So we come to the 27th verse. Abiding in every direction are perfect Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, endowed with great compassion. With palms joined, I beseech you thus.
That devotion, that devotion, you shall be udelia, and then Dusine, so what the Chagorma. Tizada, devotion, you do so what the Adikarsan, Chonam Kuna Shuba Yes, and Chojuna Shubikida, Zosang, Yedan, Janshu Sem, Sidida. Chojuna Shubike, Janshu Semba Tang, so Rechuna Shubik, because Chojuna Shubike, San Ye, Zobe, San Ye Dang, and the Janshu Semba, Papa, Janshu Semba, Papa La Sobata. Tuji Chimbong, Nanam La Sido, and the Geneke Jam Nije, Tuji Chimba, Janshu Sem Gula, Yeduken, Ye, Desolia, and the Tamaje de Soa Depsingela, Lava, Tamo Jajan, say. Deva sim yukone, sim ye deva, lu yukone, lapa tamajo, nga yukone, and Dusine pa sik jujin, and so what you said.
Here, with expressing through our body, speech, and mind, we turn to the objects of confession. And the objects of confession.
So what dips matter, so what dips matter, so you said this.
Here in the verse of confession, with expressing through our body, speech, and mind, we turn first to the objects of confession. So here we imagine the perfect Buddhas that abide in every direction, as well as the Bodhisattvas, all of whom are endowed with great compassion. And to them we turn with our palms joined. So this shows that confession is being made physically, certainly mentally too, through the meaning behind this verse, and verbally through the recitation of this verse. And we beseech them, we beseech the perfect Buddhas and Bodhisattvas.
And that's so as in a shoe at Sirwa, Dangi, Penapuru China, Sosugi, Notre Chumena, Jig Pamali, Jig Pamazal, Notre Chumene, and Mia Amazal, Pamazal Raj, Georgina, and the Jig Sosu Kujet in Betan Amelia, Pamalia, and it in it in Notre Chunson, Quanta Sach, and Nikonta Shugi in Notre Chunson, Notre Dia, meaning Notre Dinit Chunson, Notre Dia Shebatilla, that's all Sigurwa. Dina Shindang that you can't miss Lagas no to Chumana, and yet about the bombers of Chick I think in the Lagadina Cheson, no to Chunson, Dinning, no to Dinachi, Cheson said, Yashua, no so as I deny that Chiba denies that she said that I think also she said, Ya, San Yedan, Janju Semba, and the Koran to Sewa Chimbo, Niji Chimbo Gule Dende Kingeda, Sanketa Josemba, Desi Dunle Rangi Dunle Yusabage, Babaje, Desuliana, Susuki, Nodujan, Diva Sasha, Medini, Noduja, Noduja, Diva Sasha said, Dene Jesha said, so as you had left, so as Sigorda.
The term we have here is to beseech. So this is where we turn to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and we request their attention. So this is in order to confess. So we can liken it to children who have done something wrong and they know they've done something wrong. So they approach their parents to apologize and to request their forgiveness. So they will approach their parents, asking their parents to give them attention so that they can apologize for mistakes made.
Sanda Ganesu was an educated, Kuro no to get Cheverella, O Nedis and the Chichi Michilia, Goatawai, Nedis and the Kumaku, Nedin Milia, and six of Sheva in Sentinel, and no to the Nedin Sheva and say, Shuroda, or denying unto their search, and Yasuadi, made deep in it in the Sayur, say, I should Shuroda.
What is it that one will come to confess? First, one beseeches, or we ask for their attention, so that one can confess perhaps that one has lied or deceived others, or perhaps stolen from others.
Never Karatango and Chitan, never the Tahajin, the Zamacharu, never never Charugua, Kasukone, all that Dikorongo, Nietzsche, Chever, Karatan, Chevertan, got Jizin the Chevata, Jizin Chevamataje, Lucene, Kokajin, never the Gemane, Gangate, never Darugua. Then the Majiba, Gemashiba, Beshabaina, Gedina Sosulia, Semna like Niendo with Juas and Besem, Ganga Yobache, and then Gedina. Yendo Hagona Imberwa, never nitty, Kakanga never the Yerwa, Chesa never the Diamerwa, Yamashuena, Ham Beshavena, never the Nimichi Sosolia, Leg in Yangachimborwada. On Pedina, that Sosugi, Nitipa Chesha Yudpa, Ya Chik Lamadang, Conjolia, Shubena, and Shubena, Lamigi, Uncle never did I Tablam Digores, Tablam Jibata, and Tuenge. Tablam Tang do, Madu Tablam Beju Tanje, Diva the Daru Orwa, which is Diva Daru Orwa. That Diva the Pamaso, I just also be Shashavena, Ya Mashuba Shashavan, the Shai Melasugi, Tablam Ding on the Hakumar, Tabla Yomata, Denge Yomar Sosugi, Shingmarwa. Machine by another, Diva the Gedina Yovan, Jema Dunga, Diva the Jebo, Ganga de Noadi, Imichi Noya Imberwada. Or do Sine, Jazadi Shasadi, Suche, Subaina, Tibukanesha, and you run in Shivina, and I do so some dinner come Dennis Yawars Massing, Denigo come the Tiba Shache, Tiba Meva Chache, Mahoban, and Tibeti, Tebukan, and no more Chagorova. Tamashaba de Dusin Masoje, Shana Shashing Mari, Mashabana, Dini, and Children, Mahobana, that the Kanga Tiba Sache, Tibu Dunga. Kaze Yongo and Noy, Tunga Noy, Jebu Noy Chado, Cizanine, Search Shabaina, Tiba Shandu, and the Jebu Tunga Yomoya Chagua. Cizan Petina, Pet Dishi, Zanga Dromoadi, Casore, Mahobana, Ganga Chemo Chaban, and Chibarwa did.
In this verse, we're calling the attention to those to whom we are about to confess. And this process of confession we utilize in society as well, not just in the illustration of children to parents, but also if in our place of work we make a mistake. We may well go to our manager or employer and tell them about the mistake we've made so that we can reduce the ramifications that will probably follow if we were to try and hide it, but it were to be found out. Or likewise, if one has been arrested, one may confess to what one has done in the hope of, through cooperating, to be let off completely, or at least to receive a reduced sentence. So in this way, in a variety of instances in society, we are encouraged, and it's seen as the correct thing to do when we own up and say when we have done something wrong, whether we did it intentionally or unintentionally. If we've done something wrong, it's usually praiseworthy in society if one confesses this or owns up to this. So too here, one is in this process of confessing, one is engaging in part of the method that will purify accumulated non-virtue. If we do not recognize the non-virtue that we have accumulated, we will not confess it. And therefore, we will have no chance of purifying past non-virtue. Moreover, not recognizing that we perhaps repeatedly or regularly engage in certain kind of behavior, we will continue to do so. So therefore, confession is done as a part of a greater process to either weaken or hopefully entirely eliminate the possibility of experiencing the suffering that will result from our non-virtue. So therefore, if we confess, we are likely to purify, and we are also likely to bring an end or greatly reduce the non-virtue that we engage in. Whereas if one doesn't, one will not only not purify what one has already done, but one is likely to continue to accumulate further similar non-virtues.
Nyamagi sosugi dipa ji nyaba jishe batki pa sim denje da norsha di yawo chung menu sebe sosugi ngyo ye de la anu sunjin be topsi gore jisa da ngana ji lega ro ji dangbo ji je no chu ji ba de odi norsha sebe ngyo ye ba na ma ho ba na lega di na jin ji ma ro jisa di ngyo ye de jisa nye sunjin be topsi ade dene nyaba la lar mi do be toplabna 다 마음반에 싸고 있는 지금에 세비게 다 켈린 담자셔야 네발을 날미도 봐서도 네발을 야게 마주 봐서 야게 맞아 봐서 달lar 도 봐서 직제 야게 제일 야게 제일 도 봐서 달lar 미도 봐라데 마음반에 야게 네바디 촐 봐 두면 네바 지금에 세비게 담자셔야 달lar 미도 도 없어야 돼 되네 아니 지금에 도 없어야 나 델리아 저기다 녀바디 다에게 돈달이야 당하는 저기 지게 공점자베나 자주 셈공바이나라 동반 녀바디 다베 칠도 아니 배능하나 저기 두스당보 뒤로와다 당보 디베제가 삼다디 너를 중샤 셈다 중샤 셈베 너샤 셈베 교바지게 되는 마음받는 게 있다 자원이 지금에 셈베 삼났다 단 재산 드림 디바딩 샤바 디바딩에다 배직 다샤긴 셈베게 다와 지긴 셈베 삼다제 디다에게 돈달라 단 지게 동반이 공바다 동반이 공야 아니 되네게 저게 가소데 최고부야 아니 차체야 아니 지게 라미기 다 나도 숭아사야 네네기 아니 지게 공자 가리네 다 지게 개와 가르 주변에디 단 님베 돕차고 디 개와 주발 테네 다고 와 디니 돕세디 진당아 지게 군로 마서나 군로 장수 셈죠 군에 랑제 개와디겠습니다 군로 장수 셈디야 띵이 돕차로 그래 디네 야 최버지 배능아 저기 건조숨 최고부서 유디게네 띵이 돕차 그렇게 띵이 돕차 그래 제가 띵이 돕셔야 되디 어디니게 시유토네 나 삼다장아 저기 디바샤고를 해서 제가 당한주 다디들이야 소화되야디 띵이 돕유 샤베 디바샤에게 유 아니 산예다 장수 셈바 아니 지게 대술야 소소소소제 디바샤이 띵이 돕차고래 다데네게 데네데네 제샤 빼사샤세디 교계디다 녀모 순진베 돕차고래 대다다 친제능에 다 싸우기는 지금에 세베다 라메들야도 수시네 데 담자샤디 다라냐발라 라메도 돕사 다데네게 디링 디바사샤바티네 샤긴 디네 인자데 디바샤게 디바 다야 돈달랑에디 지게 냠네 디 곰게 셈비게다 아주 동반요 곰바이나 동반요 곰야다 잠니죠 곰야 안디네 하신다 데시샤바나진 저기 사예다 라미 챙아 사야 디네게 차체야 최고부야 개와 갈주베네다 님이 돕세 책으로 어두시네 디바데 샤고를 해서야지 송거로와
The entire process of purification is engaged, or confession, is contained within the practice of the four opponent powers. So these four in no particular order are the power of regret, the power of restraint, the power of reliance, and the power of the antidote. So let's look at each of them in brief. So the power of regret is where one recalls past actions that have been done or likely to have been done, and then generate regret for what one has done. And this is probably the key opponent power, is in that independence on the strength of regret generated, one is going to engage in the rest of the opponent powers, including and especially the power of restraint, refraining from repeating such a non-virtue again. So that's one opponent power, the power of regret. Another is the power of restraint, or the power of promise. And this is where one makes the commitment to refrain from repeating such negativities again. Then a third is the power of the antidote. And the antidote can be any virtuous activity that one is inclined towards. Some will meditate on, say, bodhicitta, or meditate on emptiness. Others are more inclined to making offerings or prostrations so as to purify. So others will prefer to recite name mantras of their teacher. Whichever virtuous activity one is inclined to, this one can engage in as the power of the antidote. And then the power of reliance, or the power of the basis. This would either be a motivation of refuge or bodhicitta. The objects upon which the basis relies or refers to are the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So to present this practice in one way, because the order of the four opponent powers can vary depending on what's one's own inclination. But one can turn towards the objects of reliance, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and call them to mind, and to them make one's confession. So first there's the reliance, then the confession, which is regret for past misdeeds, being aware of the suffering results that will otherwise follow. And then one commits to refraining from this negativity again. So that's the third, that of the power of restraint, or the power of the promise. So in this particular sequence, one can start with reliance, then go into regret, and then into restraint. Then ending with the power of the antidote, where again one engages in any virtuous activity specifically so as to purify these past misdeeds, such as meditating on emptiness, or making offerings, or name mantras, reciting name mantras.
Chibi kaza shakbi yu sanye dan janshu senpa digil pasa da delya deva dan nitsechi du so dip tone dan jugi chike bene da chike chikomro kyabayina da bene jam ninjiru chikombayina chisada dikom jam ninjiru komyadi nyembe top charu chisada digi digba dagiri larwa da tombay kanis dagiri labna dathanga diganis dagorasine chisada digba de gawa yorasine and Zubukalo Mara, the Chilo Mara, Kangban Hala, Johnson Hala Mara, Digba and Sashi, Digby, Nuba Ruchika, and Nanzu Simidian to Shadi, the Simidian to Nubadi Yorida, Mahomban, Dunga, Noyagi, Nubadi, Manzo Simidian to Yoderida. Chesatan, Simidian to Yodebaza, Manzo Simdi, do Sinang Gabatia, Dinin, but Mahu Chinji Mesa, Thompson, the Lamada, Idam, Debatse, do Chesang Sangi Tsenga Sabina, the Comra Cabinet, those come to Digi gave the nobody as a semi in the Shayon, that gave it nobody, Mazu Semgi, take some of the give you short down the Euro, give you some of the Dangorwa, give you some of the Tawa, and call some of the give you some of the dinner, the Nubel Masona, Shukshire Dugora. Just give you some of the Nubel Shukshire to the Yama Diva Sashi, Nubashurwa, Niba Nubichun to war, Daje, Data didn't stagor Tasset. Benanga to give Shuchikalia, Shuka, Chuchi, Shuvena, Chu Divana Shinje. 但还是 same 的修难些，其实那个 same 的修的搞了去把那龙巴差掉了吧，龙巴的搞有了是呢，修搞了过贵掉了吧龙巴，但你看那是干过了呢，人你们搞排队，人家这里你们搞人没注意是没他们的下班呢，你修过可能抽查的个查切些这都那些去龙巴的把忙用干不过了吧，那刚才这里别可能干没有下过了，你妈难瞧，按第难些。 Shugu lomba di nimi dreji kamba nashin, ane ne du se kam rodu nimi dreji ma shugu de ma tang du shugu di pa korang cawu cha du ane chu di kam ru me ba cha ru. On di nashin ngang zo semi de du dikba sa shi dikbi ki ba cha nipa di semi de du dunga nyo nipa di de yue de de. Chesa ngang zo gewi jawa di ma shuk che she du sam na du se du de ni sam na shuk che rodu ane di gewi ki shu di ki nipa di che rodu. 미개와 디버사제 니바디마 충주고 되는 지지다 디버 샤시도 샤탕으로 든 샤고다
The sequence with which one engages in the four opponent powers, this varies and depends on what one feels most inclined to. So often one may choose to start with the power of regret, because immediately coming to mind is some non-virtue that one has done. And then being aware that this non-virtue caused not only will bring suffering to oneself if it's not purified, but in the accumulation of it, it brought suffering to others. One may immediately engage in the cultivation of bodhicitta. And in the cultivation of bodhicitta, one will also turn to the basis or the power of reliance to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And then this cultivation of bodhicitta itself is the antidotal power. And one can then end with the power of restraint. So therefore we see in this illustration, one starts with regret, goes into the power of the antidote, thereafter into reliance and or basis, and lastly on restraint or promise. So here this is just another way, another order or sequence with which one can engage with the four opponent powers. It's not set, but one does need to engage in all four. And moreover, how do the four opponent powers purify? Well, to understand that, one needs to ask then, where is non-virtue to be found? Where does it abide? It does not abide in our physical body. It does not abide external to our body either, perhaps in a room. Non-virtue abides on our mind. So therefore, to purify it, to counteract it, that process of counteraction also needs to be mental. To overcome a non-virtuous consciousness requires virtuous consciousness, not form. So therefore, the opponent powers are mental, and this is important to understand. It's not about reciting a formula or engaging in a physical action. The mind has to be engaged, and the strength of the mind determines the strength of the opponent powers. The stronger the opponent powers, the stronger the counteraction to the strength of the negativity being purified. An analogy that hopefully will make this clear: if one has inadvertently made a sheet of paper wet, and now it's pretty useless, so what does one do? One dries that piece of paper, and by placing the paper in sunlight and a breeze, then the sunlight and the breeze will quickly dry the paper, and again it will become serviceable, useful. So this we can liken then to the process of purification, where the water is the non-virtue that's polluted the mind, which is like paper. And the four opponent powers are like the sunlight and wind, which dry the moisture, making the paper or the mind once again serviceable, free of the defilements of non-virtue or of water. So this then is how the process of purification works, with non-virtue being on our consciousness, and thereby opponent consciousnesses need to be employed, and the stronger the power of those opponent consciousnesses, the more non-virtue is purified. So the 27th verse ends with palms joined, I beseech you thus, and that leads us into the next verse, the 28th verse. Throughout cyclic existence, that is without beginning, in this lifetime and in all others, I ignorantly engaged in non-virtue, cause others to do so, and
Dini Jumaresene, Dini Yomaresene, Yomarwa, Sha Thomas Tasha Yomarwa, Deneba to your Dini Yomare Yomara, Nadang Naranzu Gungamadi, Dadang Gunka, Gunga Manga Zibene, Toma Yomares, and Ajewa Diwaba, the Diwaba, the Lembares. Says on Toma Merazon, Toma Mene, Koa Court, part of me, but the new Koa Court, down when the Koa and Court and do Court to by them. Toma Meden Koa Delia and Dipa Mamuchum Cheores order. Jazadinigi Diva Mamucheores, Koa me Toman Toma Meden Koa ne Serap Kintia, she Gewale, she Gewale, Gabriel Milike, Gabriel Haleke, she Gewale, Gabriel Milike, Gabriel Dundoke, Gabriel Nyavaka, Idaraki, dos in Koalia, dos scores in Serap Mamudusin, Daddy Bard, Daddy Bardu, dos in Serap Disirid, Sedilis or Chazan dos and Daddy Bardu corner coordinate, Chazan D. Rilia, and Sosugi, and Chike, Shangi, Shalia, Chicken, Nevachin, Dipa, Mambosayo, Dusine, Sosuga, Chancellor Sosugida, Dana Dipa Chevading, the Tedilia, Sosuga Dipa Garagar Chevena, Antic Chasan to Dingbar, Dursus, Chukshe Chevane, Young Mataja, Dipa Karachevena, Anzi, Jia Hagumarwa, Chizadin is Hagumar, the Ina Dana, the Karasam Dias, and that's how Toma Memadu, Kiaval Dadi, but the Dipa bottom of a J or some big, some Daja. I didn't share, but they did not shoot Jusha, some big Dusinem. Sasha did not reach Junsha, some Tangures or Chesadi, Yashu Dine, Yashu Disor, Toma Mibanga Koa, Toman, Dadem, the getting a deep part of J. says Yashu Disor, what Chesan Shu dis Denishu or Rosa. Chesading and Sosuga, some Nana, do said it, do some Tangures or.
The process of confession starts with recalling the non-virtue we've done. But the reality is, we don't really remember much of the non-virtue that we've done. We may remember what we've just done or done very recently, or something of particular strength in this life. But the reality is, throughout this life, we've accumulated so many non-virtues. And that is something that's not unique to this life, but rather we've done so in this lifetime, the lifetime previous to this, and the lifetime previous to that. In fact, as this verse starts with, throughout cyclic existence, that is without beginning, in this lifetime and in all others. So in other words, we recognize that from lifetime to lifetime, where my continuum has continued from one life to another, where the body and possibly the realm has changed, one has continued to accumulate non-virtue. Whether, as in this life, born as a human, or as in previous lives, born as an animal, or in the hells, or as a spirit, or as a god, one accumulates non-virtue. So there is this extensive store of non-virtuous deeds, vast majority of which we have no possibility of recalling. So the verse here starts out by us recognizing the limitless non-virtues that we have accumulated since time without beginning.
Toma Median Kova Seraptium Shandado said, Serapti said, Citila Sura, Shandado said, Yawangama Yanches Sura, Toma Melquad. The negative Chiores and Pigata Sosa Hakova in that how more than the Chiores and some tamor, some tangures, Chesanti no Chunsha, Sibikova, some direct. And that is Toma, that about the Dibujan, Jibba, Diamar, the Gawa Chivada. In a Gawa, some Batamaji. DB chose the some tango at the Kimzen Garelana, Diba the Meva Sogor, did not some down. Benanga the Shimbo, Mahuchina, Dina de Shimbo Yaku to go to Junsi when I could you the trailer to get the go to Dam Gen part Jesang Sudi, and you could Dina the Yaku to go to Municipal Marcaz, said that sometimes the garden, you show you the trailer to get the go to some big thing or did say to by June by you or just I didn't say, some of the Teratoma and Gawa Sayor, Diba Sayor, Niga Sayor, in a dang as a division or some tongue of the person could be or give each other Mevazo Marwa. Since the division of the Mevazo in did the nigger some Naje, did not Sha, the dream and do best Sasha, not Sha has some, the nigger, the Mount Badang, the nigger, talking a chick mess and be some died, Lucene, say. Angela and the QSM Chinja Majeke, Domsim Kiores.
In these first two lines, we are calling to mind the non-virtues that we recall having done, but also we recognize that there are an immense amount that we cannot recall. So we both recall what we can remember and we recall what we cannot remember through recognizing that through beginningless lifetimes we've accumulated extensive non-virtue. So whilst this is the case, it's also important to note that since beginningless time, whilst we have accumulated non-virtue after non-virtue, it doesn't mean that's all we have accumulated. We also accumulated extensive virtue as well. But here in this practice, the practice of confession, the focus is on non-virtue, hence that is where we're turning our mind. To make this clear, if you spend the afternoon weeding your garden, it doesn't mean that you only have weeds in your garden, but whilst you're weeding, you're focusing on removing the weeds. So that is similar to what one does in the practice of confession. Whilst one focuses on the non-virtue that one has done, it doesn't mean one has only done non-virtue, not at all. So again, in these first two lines, we recall this extensive accumulation of non-virtue, and following from regret, that opponent power of regret, one may well then immediately go to the opponent power of restraint, where one promises, I will bring this to an end. I will not continue in the same way.
And me said, he was Yama, the native called Toma, duty, called Toma, that they but do this reading, Divasajor, that did not raise, and do you gonna that Divasavati pass some down the Duschene Sumore.
In brief, if we were to summarize the meaning of the first two lines, it would be in that of time. So what is the time period in which one is confessing? Beginningless time, not just something that we can recall right now, but what we have done since beginningless time.
And in a dagi masa digiba, Sidana, that the Mashibe you. That the Vichiba, the Kanacheba, and dagi masa, need Dibe, Dichen and Dibe, Digi Dibu, Dumo Yungu about the Hamowachi, Mashibas, and Masas, and the Mashing Balabore, Dagi, and Dagi masa, Dikiba, and Jakarjin Jevarella, and Hedi, 곧 대리 제베는 디 제부 동안 연구요보다 하 먹어래스 네 신고 말 제산 디바 임바 하 먹어 디바 임바 하 먹어 디 될때는 제부 동안 기요바 하 먹어 되는 마신 베긴지 두시네 디바 빠도 매바 제요래스야지 다 되네.
The third line, I ignorantly engaged in non-virtue. So here ignorantly means unknowingly, in that one was ignorant or unknowing about the fact that this particular behavior was non-virtuous and therefore would lead to suffering. So one ignorantly engaged in an action in that one was not aware that suffering will follow.
And then 이밤 기르자와 다니 기르자와 시들 안단 결혼자냐 제발에서 내가 자냐 말은 샹달에 제시요래서 기르자와 시들 나랑 디바 제마지 니다 띄어고 토마메바네 토마메바제 데네가로야 미 샹달에 디바 제시요래서 샹달에 디바 제시요래서 안디야 랑게 마시비 원게레 준데다 디바다 동하기 준데 마시비 긴기 하모고 긴제 샹달에 디바 제시요래서 제가 네 데네기 기르자와 니다 시들 네 샹달라야 안 디바 제시요래서
The third line states that one ignorantly engaged in non-virtue oneself in this and each preceding life, but so too did one ignorantly cause others to engage in non-virtue in this and preceding lifetimes. Ignorantly, again, in the sense that one was unaware or unknowingly that this would, at the time one was not aware that this would lead to suffering.
랑게 제바마제 현달 지도 주바세야 되는 쪽에다 저게 세부 슈르와다네 본부침부터기 마음에 쇠마 현 지마 먹부잡 주고로와데 마 직수여줘야다 되니기 마 파서 마 잡주 디버사주야 안 지기야 소수기 되니기 밀샤나 꾸이지는 구마자주야 안데 지금 소수기 지마자죠 지금 먹고 지금 요버티기 가서 내가 꾸이지 내가 대소야 안 셈져 소주지야다 안 지게 되니기 내가 꾸이 셈져 소주지 먹고 차고로 와지나 되니 제는 랑기 디버 샨델야 제도 주바이나 랑기 라야 디버사 미션다 디버사 니가 디버 먹고사고 디버 숙치모사고로 되네 자지 온도체는 삼다장한데 다도체는 유일 소수기 들이야 겹건조 상계다 전주 선바트 정우수 슈 선백에 삼산 뭐바체 안데 들이야 소소라는 게 아당에 기와고 토마메바네 달리 봐도 안지게 랑기 디바바도 메바 뉴르 삼다베네 뒤바도 메방에 되니게 동아 심징 샤리아 네바치베 디바바도 메바 사요레 사다 되네 랑기 디바체바 마제 미샬라야 디바체주체 아니 나라 디바사 샬라 디바사준 디바바도 메바 사요데스 되니게 페노트 침부 준샤 스페노샤스티 자야 안데야 사이일야 슈구비기시다 되니게 소섬다이르와다 되니게 노샤 세디 상일야 다 상이기 되네 노샤 제자 되네자 당게 되니게 노트 준샤 디체바당에 디바 임바 디기 레군데 텔라티네 디부 둥왕 용요 바딩에 하 먹어와제 안두 제샤 안데니긴자 베 노트 중샤 되네 자다 디링에 되네게 디바 임바 하고 되네게 노트 임바다 하고 송 되네 자다 친친에 자오기네 지금에 셈비 dom지 삼나타 되네 자다게 디링 네 디링 안셈 딩네 아니게 디바디야 안 상예다 저시 셈비 듄리야 디바디 샤기 삼제 안두 신의 삼다제 디바샤에 돈달이야 네디 오다디레 가소레 곰자 동반이 곰고에서베 다도스간도 곰자바이나 아두스는 곰자바이나 다 디바 차고레와 디바 샤바 차고레 안디나 신 데니게 삼다제 다 소수게 지게 라미 가소레다 상이게 챙아 사바이네 챙아 사바이나 차푸하나 데니게 안지게 초푸야 간에 셰비네 데니게 개와디 다디 모소 디셰야디다 디바샤바디 진짜 뭐냐부터 샤워 누스치네 삼다장 아주게 누스치네 계슈 주고를 해서 나가지 디바샤스는 민디 따마도 돈다라 Yamagi Dibaja, Rangi Jebata, Shala Jejuba, Sosuke Mashibi, Wangi, Notri, Wangi, Jejuba, Jeju, Tiniki Dibasa, Pesasha, and Notri, Notri, Samshas and Besamta, the Mohobana Zawagin Chime, Sebesumta, Dizang, Diring, and ya, Sangeta, Sembiki, Kutuliang, Tibati Shagi, Sembesam Daja, then Sosugeda, Geju Tubiadi, then Yimbet of Chagore.
Causing others to engage in non-virtue is something that anyone with power and influence can do. Where this is clearest is military leaders and also political leaders who command others to take life. Where it also will happen is with crime bosses ordering around their underlings to engage in various non-virtuous behavior. But so too will employers encourage their staff or compel their staff to engage in non-virtue. For example, to deceive customers or take advantage of customers or suppliers. So in these and so many other ways, where one has influence over someone else, one may well encourage them to engage in non-virtue. So here we recall that we may well have done this in this life, but certainly in previous lives, since time without beginning, we will have done so. Moreover, not only have I caused others to create a non-virtue, and thereby I, along with them, accumulated non-virtue, I myself also directly caused non-virtue. Thinking like this then leads to the generation of regret. And when one was acting in this way, one largely was doing so ignorantly, in the sense that one wasn't aware then that what one was doing would lead to suffering. But now that I know that that is the case, I commit to not repeating those same mistakes again. I bring this to an end. I make this promise. I restrain myself that from now I will no longer engage in this either myself or cause others to do so. And then so in this way, in this reflection, we have now generated regret, we've made the power of restraint. Now one can then turn to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas with a deep sense of faith and refuge in them, confessing what one has done in an actual conversation with them, where one is openly admitting to them, imagining them present, and making this confession from one's heart, so with sincerity. And the sincerity will arise independent on the strength of regret, as well independence on the strength of the regret will come about the strength of the promise not to act in this way again. And those three now together will give strength to the final antidotal power, that of the power of the antidote of the purification practice, the antidotal power. So here again, one can engage in a meditation on emptiness, or on bodhicitta, or recite the names of the 35 confession Buddhas, or any other virtuous activity that one feels inclined towards. So in this way, one engages in the four opponent powers, so as to purify through the power of these practices previously accumulated non-virtue.
안지기 이 대바다 이치 대바 제바디에 다지기 대한 개화로와 대비 삼로 대한 개화로와 다 되니기 삼다제 단 지게 군로 장슈 셈니 군라다에 군로디하 다 개화로와 다 되니기 삼다의 군로 장슈 셈다 되니 군에 라제 다 소수기 지기다 차푸기네 차푸야 돼 개화 차고래 아니 지고 곰자바네 다 Diniki communiting is in Sada and Kawachagore, Diniki and Sangaro Savene, Kawasagore, Chevapuya and Kawa, just a dealing the Chasan, some of the Chasan, Kawajan, Kawiki, some of Kanya later and Chagurwa. Just a Dini Chadu, Diniki Dipa Dipa, Nubadma, Nubachun Tangorwa.
We go through each opponent power one by one. Regret for past non-virtue, that consciousness of regret towards past non-virtue, this consciousness is virtuous. Similarly, the power of restraint where one commits to not doing this again, that promise too is also virtuous. Moreover, confessing with faith to the three jewels, this mind of faith in the three jewels, this too is virtuous. And then fourthly, the power of the antidote, whether it's the recitation of your teacher's name mantra, or meditation on bodhicitta, or on emptiness, or another meditation, or engaging in prostrations. Whatever antidotal activity one engages in, this too is virtuous. So therefore all four opponent powers are themselves virtuous, and through these virtues being accumulated, they serve to overwhelm and weaken the previously accumulated non-virtue.
Tunga Daya de Umurua. Benea Dusu Chile, then Jigge Deniki, that Diva Dinit Sayer Pesa, Sambigita, Notuchunda, Sambigita, Jovajedi, got part Deniki Sam Genet, Jovadilva, Dusik Pat Jigo, Sem the one to Gurchu, and it just Junugazari, Jovadachi, Comiadachi. That dinner, and Chichen Zao in a Chigmea, Sambiga Sam Notum Semdia, the Duscomia, Chirumurua. And then that Ungosuya, Kabuya, and Jig, and Tia Divashadia, and Jig, Delegabu, nobody, the Captain Conscious Me or Captain Conscious Can, Sambi, that didn't get signed conscious me, young Divashawi, Sambigate, do some that, the Shayu, the Jikuson, Tusum, and then the Janje, and Debache, and Chagi, Sambi Mabache, Tuscomiana. Then Susanangeda, Musha Sapi Casu, and Jessemja Tamjig Tandai, San Yokoma to be Childu, Dangi, Dipa de Shagin Sempicam, San Yokoma Tomer Show, Sembicune, Janshim Yukune, did and Dalangi Dipa Shayaki Tandala, Dipa the Diag Tandalia Gidim. Tajike was Comjagin Sempe, some Daja, Sosu Comjan, the Nikom de Takarmakaze, Sosu, the Duzula Babegi, Kaze come to near. Universe come to Nayawalwa, and the Negada Dusu, 200 Dusu Daji, to know that the Negaji Gabrielia, J. Nyoptiga Yungurua, the Nega sometimes the Negabliajic, what Dusu, and Jing Lamsa, Nangimane, the Nega talk, but the bottom of Sap and Nutrujunja did the Jimino, some big Yovache, the Mombans are in the Chime, some big Samasta, and the Negi, and Delegi. That they didn't consume Dunia and Jig, Narchipi, Tibati, Chasan, Shaggy, some Daja, so together, did on Dalangi and Japugas and Benchet Puvena, the Nigger Chubby Pugas and Benchet Puvena, the Chagor, then the Medors Puvena, the Chagore, then also Sarang, the Nigger, Jig, and Cadon Rubel, Kazachevene, Cadon Rouge, Vegetarian, and Mutache, the Chevene, that the Yambo to Chagor, on Dusina some danger, on Dusine, and Gavadup, and gave do save Jelia and Jig, Yajik, Gawakan, Jig Trushipi Gawadi, and the Moaja de Ruada, Semjatam Jig Donal, Tiki to Yada, Semjan Sanyo to Yurku shows Moajab, the nation that you got Dusutuno Jinalena, Dortuchi to Chine, Jinche Chagurada, the Dusula Pabetone, to Soso, Gunjing Luta, Ajukom Jada, Deniga, Dusutuno in it, Tuno Babadusina, some David. Chicken to Divasha Chasan Chadu. Yambo to Juko in the Divashavadi, Tata Yungurvada.
I encourage you to engage in this practice of confession regularly, there'll be times when you have time on your hands and you can do it over an extensive period, but there are other times when you're more rushed. But I still encourage you then to do it in a condensed manner. So, for example, or to give an illustration of when you have more time, then spend time recalling non-virtues that you have done or you've observed, and therefore can assume that you yourself in this or past lives will have done, and generate deep regret for that, because one is, and spend time recalling the karmic results that will follow, the suffering that will follow. So this then, spending time developing sincere regret, is the one opponent power, that of regret. And when that arises powerfully, then it's much easier to make the power of reliance or promise in a sincere manner. I will refrain from repeating such behavior again. Thereafter, one can spend time recalling the three jewels to whom one is making this confession, reflecting on their many good qualities so as to generate faith in them. And then when the three jewels have arisen powerfully within one repeats one's confession and repeats one's promise to them. And then lastly, when it comes to the power of the antidote, there one can spend time on, for example, meditating on bodhicitta, where one commits to no longer harm others, but in fact not only refrain from harming others, but promise to benefit them in the most important of ways, which is to lead them to enlightenment. So in this way then, one can meditate on each of the opponent powers on a more expansive manner. But when time is short and you pushed, then I encourage you, don't ignore the practice of confession. Still do it, but do it in a condensed manner. You can quickly recall in general past non-virtues that you know will lead to suffering, and thereafter promise not to engage in them again, making that promise to the three jewels in a sincere manner. And thereafter, in terms of the antidote, here you can engage in virtuous practices that you engage in every day as perhaps as a habit or as your daily practice. So if you have, for example, every day you make offerings, then generate the first three opponent powers before making your offerings, the opponent powers of regret and reliance and restraint. Generate those three and then make your offerings as the antidote. So in this way, you've only added a little bit extra, and then you've made the offerings you usually make anyway. Or if you have particular daily recitations, your commitments that you do every day, then do those commitments as the antidotal power. And therefore, all you need to add beforehand is the other antidotal powers of regret, reliance, and restraint. So you generate those three beforehand in brief, and then when you recite your daily commitments, that can be your antidotal power. So in this way, without much extra time, you can include confession in your daily practice, even when time is restricted.
지금날 집에 디발에 교수님께 단 진실로 둠셈 산마다와체 당을 주게 샘자 탐제 디기 동안 자고도 제자 샘자 탐제 그ben에 고르위 동안 될때 타네 타르바세 토고 샘비 타르바 토비하게 된다라 야등이 냠네 지교 샘비다 소수게 개와 가르주비네 때 디바 개와 사고래 디기 디바 다고래 디바 다고래 이난 가서를 가르쳐봐서 님보 돕시 권에 샤세디 친진에 자오기는 지금에 해습에 dom셈 주요반에 마음바나 안지기 바 디비 자와 주요리야라 깔레카요 거래 다직 dom셈 매반에 뜻에 레라서 싫어바디 베나가 지디르와 지게 레가르시나 레가미르바지 미지기 매세베게 답변에 팀지요바나 팀들 삼단제네 고 어다딩이 디 켈렌제 디진 디마르셈비게 삼노디 아니 디보티 제메알이야 레라 용거라 까투야 까투바 용거 잔수 체죠 데니게 지메바이나 근데 고압 약보라자 다가야 말씀을 제시 디바디 자와가 바쇼라 용거로와 어디나je dom섬 디메바이나 친제리아 디발이야 지게 잼메짐바디 용하게 레라 용거 다 dom섬 지어바이나 다디 아디 지메 셈베 dom바지 dom섬이 셈바디 타주베 담자 샤바인사 소수기 제들레 디벨레 자 주여레 깔려카다 디용거로와 디라디지로 제사다 대 친지 닝아마 디버 제버들 교슴 제바나 아직 디버 샤야 또 숙체요 대 교슴 매워진다 대 냐마 제바데 가요 말씀베다 냐마 제사 가요 말씀베 삼다나 가요 말씀베 삼라 쉐베나 이제 냐마 제베 디버들 뜻 지게 가서래 제수 이랑으로 초로 내리가 책으로와 세상 디 다다 책으로만 되네는 되네자 다 냐마 제베게 교슴 제 친마 dom섬 제베나 디바샤야들 뉴슈를 마서는 숙체용 거. 디네자다 디바샤게 갑라 디체고래 사지마다. 셴다 디멤비게 디네는 아마 교선의 친지도 dom섬마게 베네 개화 주베네 개화 디게 소술이야. 안지게 디바다야를 핑거를 베서는 핑거를 받아.
These four opponent powers, again, are the powers of regret, the power of reliance, or the power of the basis, the power of restraint, or the power of the promise, and the power of the antidote. So amongst these four, two of them you will be engaging in with whatever virtuous practice one engages in. The power of reliance, there when one generates refuge and bodhicitta, and the power of the antidote will be then the virtuous activity that follows, whether it's meditation or making offerings. So if one says, so what is special then about the four opponent powers? Because in one's everyday virtuous activities, some of these opponent powers are intentionally generated. So do they then purify or not? What, as was said earlier, where non-virtue is to be found is on your mind, and therefore what purifies it are opposing consciousnesses. So when one generates virtuous consciousnesses, they do purify non-virtuous consciousnesses. So therefore, whenever one goes for refuge, or whenever one engages in other virtuous activities, here called the power of the antidote, that does serve to weaken non-virtue. So then what is the difference? Why should one specifically generate the four opponent powers? Why should not one just go, for example, reciting one's daily commitments without adding in the opponent powers? And specifically because of generating regret, and in particular what results from regret, that of restraint, or the power of the promise not to repeat, these two are of great additional benefit. Because not only being both virtuous minds, regretting and promising not to repeat, not only being virtuous minds do they serve to purify, but they do serve to make it much more likely that one will stop past or even current non-virtuous habitual patterns. So again, if one only engages in, say, going for refuge and then, say, meditating on bodhicitta, so the powers of restraint and the powers of reliance and the power of the antidote, in that, whilst one is purifying because one is generating virtuous minds, one isn't recognizing past non-virtue, one isn't recognizing perhaps non-virtuous patterns that we regularly make, and one certainly is making no promise to bring an end to these repeated, in particular the repeated non-virtues that we engage in. Whereas when all four opponent powers are generated, even if the antidotal power, one isn't doing anything extra, for example, just reciting your commitments you would have recited anyway, because of the additional virtuous activities of regret and promise, one will not only purify, but one will be more likely to bring an end to non-virtue.
and Divatik Korshiare, and Divarena Danatigre.
So then thank you. We can conclude there for tonight. But if you have questions, there's still a few minutes, so please feel free to ask. Then thank you very much. Oh, wait, sorry, no, there's one at the back.
Yeah, sorry. So when we commit like non-virtuous deeds, and then we do the virtuous deeds, is once enough, like say we're not making offering, like, does it have to depend on how bad the non-virtuous action is to, yeah.
Yeah, so can Geshe say something more on how much one needs to confess? Because one may confess once, but then is it that necessarily purified? Or how much more does one need to confess? Yeah.
The Diva Dilia and Diva Chishu Mangoyorwa, Diva Chunju in an ede as a Shabbat Sarjicena Dava Yungre, because Kanjele Benanga the Dirwada, Jalalian, Chichawach Kudebene, Deshene Lela Chida Suterwa, that Dinan Chawro, which had Melzam de la Galaka, Dinashi, Diva di, then Chunju Regiment Dalela, Kanjele and the Chiksama Sena, Manu Matoma Chiksama Chagro, Dinashing out the Diva Sai Chai Donale, Chikawa Savana, Diva Cheshun Baba Chunju, Dago, the Magic Horong, Nuba topic. She's a Diva Sha said, Shai, the Diva Horon, the top Cheshun, Nuba Cheshun Kava, Nuba Chewa, the Nuba Chewa, and it's just Sha Kalakare, the Tinchuma, the Chale Lavare, Tipico Yugi Chane. Diane Sosugi Yaming Chane, Sosugilia, and the Ningdopta, the Neo Gomba, Gazet, Chickpen, QSM, the Shukchawada, Domsim Shukchawada, Samlona, like as Nubal Mason, the Nigging as some Caplia, Samlon Mason, Nuba, the Gazet, Shukche, Juvene, Digi, called Nimbal Masona, could Shukche as a Diva Dialia, Shukche Yungore. That thing on Juga was a twins that Jimenez that Diva Dabi, Tandam Unity Diva Sasan Chibi, Caplia, Diva Dabi, Tasan Roji, Dangan Jugi, and Chida, and Nilam Nala, just Tasan Roji, or Esiore, Takari Kanisuresne, Jugi, Chida de Milam Dala, Tamara Tonju, in our Suzuki, Diva Shagi, Denigi. Gom Japti Chelia, and Nina, Nilam Nalia, and Chige, Subutua Toyada, Subutua Toyada, Nimigi Shadovata, Duce Tovane, Diva Tabi, Taro, Chago Rezed, Tasan Rutinisha, Nedinigi, Tanganajuge, Lamsa, Diva Kanishai, Dagu, how could do anything and Zuka Valero, how could then the Sosulia, the Mahombana. The Susugi, the Calas of Topalamas, and Oscar Lady, the Hagutia Yumata, that thing on the Divadi, that Susugi, thousands of Mochi, Remato, Chingansugi, Lamsang, and the Tibetava, how could you have the Calabua?
In terms of non-virtuous deeds one has engaged in, there, of course, is, as you mentioned, a great variety in strength. Some things we've done are really quite horrendous. Others, they're pretty slight. So there is this tremendous scale of non-virtue that beings have all accumulated. And just like if one is cleaning something that's dirty, if it's only a little dirty, quickly it becomes clean. If it's really filthy, and a lot more effort is required. So therefore there's a variation in terms of the strength of negativity of a particular karmic deed. Similarly, on the side of the confessing consciousness, the mind engaging in the four opponent powers, there is also a great gradient there in terms of the strength of the mind engaging in the confession. If one is merely reciting words and going through a formula, the mind's weak. So the level of purification is weak. But if the regret is deep and strong, all the others are likely to be very strong. And so forth. And likewise with opponent power. If one is skilled in a meditation on emptiness, on bodhicitta, that opponent power will have much more strength. So therefore there really is quite a gradient in terms of both the strength of the non-virtue accumulated as well as the strength of the purifying consciousness. In terms of a particular non-virtue, whether that has been purified or not, this really is difficult for us to tell. Those who are highly developed, they can tell. But for us, this is really a bit beyond us. All that we can point to are in the Lamrim, they point out to various signs one can perceive in one's dreams. And those one can interpret as my purification in general is going well. Not about something specific, but in general. And signs such as seeing sunlight or one being washed or washing one's body, so like being cleaned. So those are the kind of general signs one may experience in dreams, which one can interpret as being signs that our purification is going well. But it also should be said that in dreams many things appear. It doesn't necessarily carry any meaning. So for people like ourselves, if we do something today and we confess it tonight, and then we wonder, well, have I really purified it or not? Well, we can generate the aspiration that we have, and that's about the best we can do. But the intelligent way to understand this is the variety in strength in terms of non-virtuous deed, and the variety in strength of purifying consciousness. And we try and apply ourselves as well as we can. Okay. Thank you.